Today I talked to Steve Heilig, MPH, a guy I know from the pet store. He would come in, still does, almost every day with his dog, Shuggy, who's here with us today. The MPH stands for Master of Public Health. He is the co-editor of the Cambridge Quarterly on Healthcare Ethics, Cambridge University. I mean, this guy has a lot of titles, a lot of degrees, and I'll just say he's one of those people that's working for us, for the world, not for himself. I'll probably later on tonight dick around and write my 100,000th song about She Broke My Heart or whatever. Steve will probably be writing a medical paper. I mean, he's not quite a doctor, but he has got his hand in a lot of areas of public health, and he's working for us. And he was kind enough to come over and talk to me, even if he's not the normal tortured soul type that I try to get in here and talk to, but he's cool. Here he is. Where did you grow up?
I grew up down in Southern California at the beach, and it was in Orange County, halfway between LA and San Diego. I wouldn't trade where and when I grew up for anywhere, but I can't stand it now.
Right. Were your folks Republican?
Yeah, my mom was apolitical. I think she was a nurse and just very sweet, but my dad was a Republican kingpin. He drank in the local dive bar with the likes of John Wayne and Ronald Reagan, people like that.
Really?
And he was very into that whole world.
Did you meet those guys?
He knew him.
No, you.
Oh, never met Reagan. I met John Wayne. I had a drink with him once, actually, and I wasn't even old enough.
Nice.
No, I knew where to find my dad if I was coming. So I went to high school there, and then I went up to Santa Barbara for undergrad, which is about 3 hours north, and then I was in graduate school in LA, at UCLA, about an hour north. So I could come down on Friday to beat the traffic in the day, and I knew where to find my dad in the afternoon on Friday afternoon at the local bar.
The bar.
So I went into one. This place was just called The Place, and it was a classic dive bar with, velvet paintings of naked Mexican women on the walls, and a phone booth in the corner where the local bookie took all his bets and such. And I walked in, and there's my dad at the bar with a couple other people, but I didn't really look. I was probably 20, and I don't know what to drink yet. And I went in and came up to somebody, "Hey, Pop." I don't know if I'd even told him I was coming down the night before or something, but, "Hey," and he leans back and goes, "Steve, this is my buddy John. John, this is my son Steve." And I look, and there's John Wayne sitting there. And meanwhile, the bartender had come over, is standing in front of me. And I'm just looking, I'm not saying a word, and the bartender says, "Do you want something?" And I'm not old enough really, but I'm like, And I'm quiet enough, and John Wayne says in his voice, "Just don't stand there, son, order a drink." So I said, "I'll have what they're having." And the bartender said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Sure." And he came over eventually with a little tray. It had 4 glasses on it. This was a round for them. It was a pint glass, double, with a couple with ice in it, double Chivas rocks, or triple, I guess, in a pint glass, a shot of tequila, a pint of beer, and a water back.
A water back.
And that's what she drank. So when I would, this wasn't only that time, but whenever I'd meet my dad down there, I had a Volkswagen van, of course, classic hippie thing, and I would go out in the parking lot from wherever I had met him and pass out. He'd go back to work.
What was his business?
He was the director of a large division of Ford Motor Company that did electronics, which mainly meant military contracting then.
And so he'd have this 7 martini lunch and then just go back to work?
Yeah. He was a very high-functioning alcoholic.
Right. Did you get along with him?
I got along with him. We weren't close until, he died about 15 years ago now. And we got closer towards the end. We never fought really, but he was a scary guy. So we just had that distant kind of
Did he hit you?
Never.
Yeah,
that threat, it's an interesting question, because that perceived threat of violence is a big part of the whole theory and of adult children with alcoholics
Uh-huh.
is that you never know where you are. So a friend of mine, we did an interview up in Marin, one of the jobs I have, Peter Coyote, the actor, he's an old friend here from The Hate too, and he likened his dad to coming home from work as somebody rolling a hand grenade into the living room, and you didn't know if the pin had been pulled or not. So you were always anxious.
Yeah.
That happened a lot, but no, he was never violent, and he was a man of great integrity, even though he was doing this stuff that a lot of people disagreed with, including me later, but we just didn't talk about it. But he was very into being, standing up to your word, being ethical, working hard, and all that.
The stuff you didn't agree with, you mean like the like
war.
working in the defense industry, so to speak. But in his mind, he probably it's like he really thought he was defending the country.
Oh yeah.
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 Did you?
Well, but this was Vietnam, which by then, the last years of Vietnam, it was a very unpopular war. So we even had at one point, he sat us down. I have two sisters, one older, one younger, and we're all young teenagers. And he sat us down one evening and said, "There's been a threat by an anti-war terrorist group against our family, and we don't know if it's real or anything, but I want you," and he points at my sisters, "I want you guys in by dark every night." And me, it was just like, whatever. It was a sexist thing. He goes, "You have fun. Be careful." He did say, the only thing I remember about this is he said, "Don't get into any cars without looking in the back seat." You know? So good advice anyway, I guess. But what they didn't know, which was funny, is I was hitchhiking around up and down the coast and around the country and wanting to be a Jack Kerouac.
Okay, so what age? Now, this is what I always thought was funny about you and me. Our relationship is you're only 4 years older than me. Yet to talk to you, you're like, you clearly view yourself as from the '60s. Like you're from that culture. Everyone the work you've done. And I'm only 4 years younger, and I consider myself firmly from the '70s and even early '80s.
Well, I consider it '70s too, but a lot of people say that the actual '60s, in a cultural sense, were from '64 to '74.
Yeah.
Because it was after the British invasion, the Beatles came, plus right about then, LSD came in, the birth control pill came in, the baby boomers from post-World War II were all coming of age, at that point, being 18 something. So I was younger than that, but I was a big reader.
Yeah.
And so I read all the books. I read Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which was set here. I read all the Kerouac books, Richard Brautigan, and I got a subscription quite young to Rolling Stone too. So I was reading all this stuff, and then the other thing is that down there, so Laguna Beach, Corona del Mar, those are the towns that we lived in. Laguna had its own Summer of Love a few years after the one here in the Haight.
Right.
And so there was the biggest LSD dealing ring in American history was out of this little beach town, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love.
I remember
Timothy Leary moved there. There was free concerts in the park, and there were freaks everywhere. A camel.
How old were you when you first... A camel what?
Camel walking down the beach with a guy in a robe on top throwing out tabs of acid on little 3x5 cards. So this is the stuff that I'm on my Stingray, 10 years old.
That's how old you were when he did acid the first time?
No, I didn't do it, but I saw it. And I saw the freaks all over. No, I think I was 13 or 14 first time. It was everywhere at that point. So we had this big thing, and to me it was, of course, fascinating, even romantic, romanticize it, like, wow, freedom, bands playing out in the park and out on the field by University of California, Irvine, UCI. We'd ride our little scooters out there and go to these shows. I'd see people having sex on the ground, and there'd be a band playing, and there'd be a big pot of brown stew, hippie stew we called it. So this stuff was formative to me, and one of the things that I wound up in more recent years leading tours of the Haight, the history of it from a medical and drug point of view for freshman medical students here at UCSF. But one of the things that I read about was the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic starting here. And I just thought that was really cool and fascinating. Started by a young guy who was basically a country bumpkin from Bakersfield, who came out of medical school here right as the Haight was starting to have its Summer of Love type stuff. So I had no idea what I was going to do in life, but my dad, the positive influence of him was that he was really big on education. That was his thing. stay in school, basically, right?
Right.
Even though I didn't know what I wanted to do, and he never directed me. He never said a thing about you should study this, that, or the other.
Let me just stop in for a second here and say, my dad too. My dad was a college professor, and he's the same way. He didn't care. Just stay in school. Stay in school. You know, you want to be a musician, that's cool, but have a backup. And you know, sadly, he ended up being my backup. You know, what can I say? But I didn't stay in school. And what strikes me about Steve, he's not the normal tortured soul that or formerly tortured soul that I try to interview. And really, if you're a tortured soul, is it ever going to be formerly? Anyway, I'm down here in the garage trying to do some editing, and it's difficult because upstairs, right above me, is a stray cat that came into our yard a couple days ago, and they're going to come over and test it for kitty AIDS and leukemia today. And it already doesn't look good. It had an initial visit from a vet who couldn't draw blood, and I had to act as his assistant. It was highly traumatic. I'm holding this cat. Anyway, I won't go into it anymore. But they're coming back today, 2 people, and if it turns out the cat's sick, we're going to have to put it down because they just don't, they can't mix with our cats, and you know, you let it outside, it's just going to have a prolonged, awful death. So, you know, Steve did a lot of work in getting it legal in California for assisted, you know, termination of life in case of terminal illness. And man, it's not a great place to be in charge of whether or not someone lives. I don't like it. So I'm having a stiff drink. Anyway, back to the podcast, or back to Steve.
At that point, still, the University of California was very cheap. Best public school system in the world, I'd say. You could go to Berkeley, UCLA, any of these schools for, if you were a California resident, for almost nothing. So, and rent was cheap all over. So I was able to live on the beach and go for years to a really great school that I could bike to and have this really cool life while getting college degrees. I did a so-called Distinguished Alum Address about 5 years ago at UC Santa Barbara, and I told the stories about what it was like back then, and when the kids, which is what they are now, they weren't born yet when I was there, when they lined up to ask me questions, all they wanted to hear about, what was it like to interview Bob Marley for the radio station, and what was it like to see Jerry Garcia live in the gym or the stadium.
A lot of people I know are children of alcoholics, and it's like you seem to have avoided that, though, and are more well-adjusted.
It was touch and go there, yeah. So my initial memories, the first real drinking was going to your parents' liquor cabinet and taking a little bit out of each bottle.
Putting water in?
Pouring that, well, no, yeah, sometimes we'd refill it some, but we'd pour it all into the same, whatever, jar and drink that stuff.
Yeah.
And throw up. So we'd be down the beach, throwing up every weekend and going, this is horrible, I'm never going to do this again, and we'd be doing it again the next. So one of the things that we've learned in addiction medicine long ago is that the earlier the onset of regular use of any drug, the more likely you're going to have a problem. One of the other things about alcoholism, and in particular, is there's a natural history of it, kind of where it develops, and for a lot of people, it's about 10 years it takes from the onset of regular use to serious problems.
Uh-huh. Okay, hold on a second. All right, so 25 to 35, and then that serious problems at 35, 45, 55. So 20 years since these supposed serious problems. Okay, I'll think about it. Could be right.
I would say of my there's 5 of us, 4 closest friends, I'm the only one that didn't become a frank alcoholic and addict. And 2 of them have died from it in earlier years from either an infection they picked up from their addictions or just ruining their everything. So I did escape it, but I actually remember starting to get hangovers and thinking, this isn't cool. I don't want to be my dad, for one thing. He'd wake up coughing, hacking, and I'd go fishing trips with him to Mexico, and the drinking was intense, starting, at noon. whiskey and beer and everything else. And I didn't like it enough to do that. Same thing with pot. I was really into pot when I was very young. Everybody was. I actually started dealing it in high school. But I realized kind of the thing that triggered it for me to cut way back on that was it became an end rather than a means, in that you were just doing, your life was focused on pot. Let's get this stuff and let's get loaded, let's do this.
Before I go do this, I'm going to get high.
Rather than just like, I'm going to get a little high and go surfing, or I'm going to get high and go to a show, or whatever it was. It became its own thing. And I realized it was making me fuzzy in the head. I also had this illusion that when I was going to go off to college, that it was going to be so intellectually demanding that I couldn't smoke pot. Well, that was kind of funny, because then once, I stopped for like 6 months or a year, before I went to college. And you get to college and freshmen, and it's the most messed up group of partying people that don't know. I remember looking at people and going, didn't you get this out of your system in high school? There I am, the wise old 18.
You're lucky then. I mean, I
was lucky.
I'm the same way with friends of mine and heroin and
oh yeah,
things, mostly heroin, where I did it, never shot it, but almost everyone that I know that I ever did it with or party with, and lots of people I didn't, got hooked badly, and many people died.
Well, cocaine too.
Cocaine.
Just think of late 70s. That was like, cocaine came in heavy. And so there's a whole genre or a whole era of music that just reminds me of Coke. Whether it's Fleetwood Mac or Steely Dan or all that stuff. It's just blow music to me in terms of that, because that's what it was playing. And everybody I knew was dealing Coke, and then eventually shooting it up too.
It's not good. Coke is not good for playing music.
It's not good for anything, really.
It's horrible.
And so... But this is what happened, and then people, maybe once you pass the needleberry, as it were, you'll shoot anything. So
did
heroin started.
Did you ever shoot anything?
Did I ever shoot anything?
Yeah, like even once when you're...
Yeah, I tried it. I tried anything once, but fortunately, like I say, I didn't have, even though I've always felt like I had the gene in me to some degree, because I firmly believe there's a genetic component.
That's my next question.
Well, yeah, but it's not determinative. It doesn't mean you're going to be an addict. It's just that you have a higher chance.
Right. If you have that gene and you try heroin or whatever it is.
Well, or even just so I feel it with alcohol. That's how I learned, that I probably have the tendency. And again, two alcoholic parents to various degrees. My mom was, she liked to drink a lot of wine, but she was also high functioning. She was a director of nursing for a long time and raised 3 kids, and totally sweet woman. Wonderful woman all the way through. But the thing is I can have a big glass of wine or something like that, and something in my psyche, my body says, that's good, have more.
But you're also able to only have that one, though.
No, I have no problem with it. Yeah. I mean, I was just by habit and by social, partying way back in my 20s is when it was just becoming a regular thing, I was never a guy to wake up and, drink in the morning or that kind of thing, unless we were going to go do something fun at the beach.
Right,
But no, never got to that point, but I'd go visit my friends that had moved to different places, or they'd come to visit me, and it would just, all hell would break loose, you know? And then it was like, okay, we got the beer, let's go get some Coke, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't like that much. I just didn't like it.
I just liked those things as fuel. Fueling the social. I had a social addiction where I had to be out every night, and
and that's in bars and everything else.
Yeah, so. And it's like there's no opportunity to say, I'm just gonna have 2, because you're gonna stay there. I'd be on the pool table, just be like the next thing. And it's great listening to I'm cutting back in here, folks. Listening to myself. Who am I trying to fool? Him, the addiction expert, or myself. I just had a social, and a social addiction. Well, sure, I had that. And when he talks about, like, he was never a guy to wake up and drink, I mean, that's a barometer I've used for why I don't have a problem or why I'm not an alcoholic. You're always pitting yourself against what you imagine other people are doing, which makes them the people that have a problem, not yourself. By the way, the cat came back negative for everything bad, at least is what, in terms of what could be transmitted to our cats. So we have a new cat. On Halloween, we adopted a black cat.
And I knew even though he never said anything, his expectations were very big that I would stay in school. So I did. I did basically 8 years of collegiate stuff and got 3 degrees, and I just kept staying in it, even though I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was process of elimination. I did not want to go to law school. I did not want to be a business guy. My friends were going into real estate and banking, and I was like, just kill me now,
Kill me
I'm not
now.
going to do that. And I had all these romantic notions still from the books I'd read and the music I'd heard that I could maybe just be a wandering kind of hobo. And I did. So what I ended up doing after undergrad school, I went to just process of elimination again. School of Public Health at UCLA, one of the best in the world. It's part of the medical school there. And I got into this program, which is a joint medical and public health program. It's 6 years, medical school and a master's in public health. I was still partying. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And it's very demanding, the amount of work you're going to do, the amount of science and all that. And so I figured about 1 year, not even a year in, first 6 months, I don't want to spend the rest of my 20s doing this, being in school. It's just not for me. I can come back later. I'll get the master's in public health and do something else and travel around the world some, and then come back. So I did that. The first job I got was in Ghana, West Africa. The dean of the School of Public Health and I hit it off. He liked me. He was one of these guys, professors can make a lot of money by contracting with like the World Health Organization to say, we'll help you do, in this case, a network of rural clinics in whatever country.
Preceding my question, what I didn't ask, which is, did you have a conscious moment when you decided, I want to help people? Like, that's my trip?
Hold that thought. We'll come back to that. It's an interesting one. But, the professors would have a contract. They say, I've got 8 people to work for me, with me. We're going to go do something cool somewhere around the world. And they're getting paid a lot for it, and they're paying us, the students, the graduates, a little bit, and they make a lot of money. It's a business. And so he sent us off, and I lasted a few months there. There was political problem. They basically kicked us out. And I took the money that was owed me and traveled around the world for almost 2 years. Spent it down to where I was going to be broke again, with the understanding that I was coming back here. What I decided was to come back. I always liked San Francisco. I'd gone to Berkeley briefly as an undergrad. Back then you could transfer in between campuses, no problem. And I said, I'm going to come back to Berkeley and do my doctorate in public health. And I'm out of money, so I got to come home. And so I did. I came back here. And we can take it from there. But to your question about knowing you want to help people, it's an interesting thing. A woman who I work with out in Marin sometimes, Rachel Naomi Remen. She's a doctor, pediatrician, very famous author. She's written a couple of books about just wisdom and life and everything. And she gives talks out there. She's basically retired now. But one of her questions, or one of her little informal research thoughts, was that people who go into quote-unquote helping professions or trying to quote-unquote save the world or any of that stuff tend to have some kind of signature moment before they're 10 years old.
Really?
And she said almost everybody that she interviews and talks with, if they really think about it, they can think of something that happened in that early childhood that set them on their path. And when she said that to me, I couldn't really think of anything, But then I thought of this story that was kind of, when I was growing up down there and it was still open fields, I had my own kind of private frog pond up in the hills within, half an hour from my house. You could walk up in the hills. It's looking out down towards the ocean, Catalina Island. They're beautiful, but there was a frog pond that was, I think, mostly from rain. There must have been a spring or something. But, every year there would be huge amounts of tadpoles in there and then frogs coming out. I'd go out and hang out, and I used to collect them in a jar and bring the tadpoles, bring them home, put them in a wheelbarrow in our backyard, and then watch them turn into frogs and hatch out and go around. My dad finally stopped it because it was so loud at night with all the croaking. He said, no more.
No more.
You can't sleep. But I went out there once, and there was a kid my age who I didn't know, smashing the frogs on the rock with another rock.
At the pond?
At the pond.
Oh, yeah.
And I had this moment of rage, and I wasn't a big kid or anything, but I wasn't, violent or anything, but I punched the guy in the face with there and threw him in the pond, right? So, and then, we both ran off, and then that night, the phone rang because everybody was in this small area, knew each other, and the kid knew who I was, I guess. And, there was a conversation. My dad he called me out. He wasn't even home that much because he was traveling the world, but he called me out. He goes, "Hey, we had a call from Mr. So-and-so, and he says you punched his kid in the face. Is that true?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, "Why?" And I told him, and my dad, he started cracking up. And he said, "Just don't do that again." I could tell he was actually proud of me.
Right, yeah, don't do that again.
He was like, "Don't do that again, get out of here." So, but, whether that was part of it, because a large part of my work, the two areas I worked in my whole career have been the environment, ecological and public health.
I think that demonstrates not so much as that one instance is what set you on the path. That's indicative of who you were inside. Your first gut reaction was just to stop this person from being mean.
I don't have any desire to work only for money if I can avoid it. And whenever I've tried to do something only for money, whether it's investing or some sort of scam, it always backfires. When I did come back to San Francisco, and this is now early 80s, guess what was happening?
AIDS?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the epidemic was exploding. When I arrived here, 83, it wasn't even known yet what caused it.
I moved here in 85 to the Castro.
Yeah.
It was like...
Yeah, no, it was a war zone.
It was a war zone, man.
And so, but you didn't know at that point what caused it. The research was frenzied to say, so it was suspected to be a virus. How's it transmitted? We don't know. Could it be mosquitoes? Could it be you're working in a hospital and you could get, it that way? So it was a wartime and very intense. And there was a job in San Francisco to help coordinate the response, working with the medical association here, the university, and the health department. And they'd set up a citywide commission of all these people in different fields, and they needed somebody to basically staff it, run it. So I had the right degree. I had a master's degree with a focus in infectious diseases, epidemiology, and all that. It was perfect, but I was supposed to be going to grad school in another 6 months. So I took this job basically to get it started with a 6-month understanding.
Right.
So here's 35 years later, I'm still basically working with the same organizations. But that first 10 years or so, most of my work, or a big chunk of it, was focused on HIV. And we did a lot of pioneering stuff. And a lot of it, the way I got hooked into the hate clinic here, even though I already knew about it, like I say, and wanted to meet Dr. Dave, who's my mentor and friend now. He's now 80 years old.
Dr. David Smith.
David Smith.
Who's also a pet store customer, by the way.
Yeah. So I went to talk to him because it was looking like the virus, which wasn't even named yet, the name it has now, but the virus was being transmitted via syringes, via needles. And I wanted to talk to him because I'd read the research. I was spending a lot of time scanning everything that in the Netherlands they had started a needle exchange program to interrupt the transmission. And so I went to introduce myself basically, and I could come from, the thing about this job is I could get in anywhere. I could go to the mayor if I wanted to because of the position, this commission. It was a big deal. And I went and saw Dave and said, what do you think of this? And he was an addiction doc, a pioneer. And he said, that's a bad idea. It's enabling addiction. And I said, yeah, well, what if it interrupts transmission and blah, blah, blah. And he said, it makes me very uncomfortable. So we ended up talking about it, following the research. I helped with the first needle exchange program down here, and we were in the Mission and the Tenderloin giving out stuff. And what I realized was a lot of the users didn't trust anybody because they were going to get arrested if they did anything. But if you were giving them needles, you get their trust because you weren't judging them. So I said, what if we refer anybody who wants to treatment? I had told this today. We'll send people to the clinic if, and you guys will accept them because you're non-judgmental and this is what you do and you're as good at it as anybody in the world. So that started, and Dave, to his credit, he saw, this is actually a good way to get people into the health system and treat. So he became a very vocal and powerful advocate eventually, and I saw how science and evidence could change people's minds. And we actually then carried the laws forward that got this legalized in California.
Still hard to look at it, though, from the outside and not think, like, it's just enabling addicts. Like, why would we,
Yeah, well, you do for a time. I mean, a lot of them, they might use, if they survive, they might use needles for another year or two or more. But eventually they might hit a point where they say, I don't want to do this anymore. In the meanwhile, you may have saved them from HIV and or Hep C, saved their lives, and you get them into the health system where they can try to get treatment, etc.
Yeah,
and get treated for other stuff too.
You might get some people before,
you do,
and then they're not going to end up dying or
you really do.
Impacting
it's been
on
shown.
the system.
So you can go all the way to the National Academy of Sciences now, and their analysis of this from years ago says it works and it doesn't. Nobody, I mean, just think of it logically. Nobody, people get some junk, they want to shoot it up. They want a needle. They'll use it whether it's clean or not. Nobody gets a needle and goes, cool, I have a needle now. Now I want to shoot something up just because
I've been really looking to shoot up. Now I'm going to go down that needle
Now
change.
I'm going to put something in it. It just doesn't work that way. The other big issue from that era that I got very involved in was death and dying stuff. And that took 20 years, but as you probably know, just 3 years ago now, we legalized it in California. And that came out of right here, San Francisco.
Legalized?
The right to die. Assisted dying. We don't call it suicide because it's not. I mean, even the Psychiatric Association said this is different. This isn't about despair, suicide. People, this is at the end of life. You have to have a diagnosis of a lethal
Now,
disease.
what does that mean? Like, how far does that go? Like, does that extend to, your spouse? You say to your spouse, listen, if I'm ever this and that, just kill me, Or how do you go about it?
That's different. This is actually having a physician assist you in ending your life sooner than it would have happened.
Yeah.
Which usually in these cases, so what I was saying is the first screen for this that makes you even eligible is you need a diagnosis that you're not going to live more than 6 months.
Oh.
So this is the same diagnosis that you get for hospice care. And that's a guess. I mean, usually you're right when you make that guess with the patient, but because you know where their trajectory is and what their disease is.
And then the doctor does it for you?
Not in this place. They do it in some places. No, they make sure you have the right evaluation, that you're not doing this just because you're depressed or because somebody's pressuring you, or because there might be other treatment you haven't tried that might work, but you rule out all that stuff. So basically there's no question.
What about if you're quadriplegic?
You need the lethal diagnosis. So this is, you're getting into some of the ethicals. That's true. So MS and ALS, for example, where you have a terrible degenerative disease, but you don't have a lethal diagnosis, you're not eligible.
Right.
You need the lethal diagnosis. So
does that open up a new market for doctors that will provide that?
There's a handful of docs who are doing this as their primary thing, but it's not something that most docs want to do. But they will with long-standing patients. But there's very few that want to set themselves up at that. But those guys, the ones who are doing it, are really providing a service to people who can't get it otherwise.
Come on down. Got openings
remember how it started. So 25 years ago, there was Dr. Jack Kevorkian. That's what he was doing.
I know.
But it was illegal, and he was an extremely creepy guy who, if you ever look at him, a picture alongside Hannibal the Cannibal, Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs, he's the same guy. He was a very creepy guy. I actually met him on a panel.
He was creepy in person or just looked creepy?
Both.
Well, creepy how? Like emotionless or just...
Yeah, well, he was actually kicked out of a residency when he was a young man training for doing something bad to corpses.
Didn't you have something to do with the legalization of pot too? Medical marijuana?
Yeah, so that came out of the AIDS epidemic too. There was a lot of patients who were using pot for a couple things, but primarily nausea if they were getting chemotherapy of some kind, and for pain and spasticity, where certain conditions you have tremors and various tightened muscles and all that. We started to talk about, should this be at least legalized medically, and as you know, it was 1997. An initiative came here finally that legalized it.
You said, maybe before you even came over here, like, my dream was to be a hobo. But you had those 2 years where you traveled around.
Well, even before that. So the thing that was interesting when I was a kid, I started hitchhiking and bike riding long distance at about 15, I think. I would go out on the highway down there in Orange County and put out my thumb and go north. It was always north. There was no place south unless you were going down to Mexico, and you couldn't even go if you weren't 18. But I was actually busted once. I was going down there. I was 17. This girl I really liked was 18, and we were going to go to Mexico just for the day. And we drove. We got turned around because I wasn't old enough. They checked ID, and they actually sent a letter to my house. This is the feds, immigration or whatever. They said, we think you should know that we intercepted your son trying to enter Mexico with an adult woman. Nice. She was 18. My dad was like, wow, right on, man. Who was she?
I know. Do you have any pictures? I know. Yeah. I can't imagine your dad would be anything but proud there.
Yeah, another one. But I used to hitchhike, and so I hitchhiked all over the West Coast.
Did you ever hop trains?
Yeah, hop some trains. This was part of it,
It's still the romanticized. People still do it, supposedly.
Well, this is the interesting thing. Is one of the stories that I read of Kerouac's in a little book. So I always had paperbacks with me, and you trade paperbacks with people. I had a book of short pieces called Lonesome Traveler. And I think it's the first story in there. He hitchhikes north, and the stretch with an old hobo that he meets. The stretch there, the most beautiful part is that there's about 90 miles that goes along the coast where there's no highway. And so you get to go, and if you sit in the boxcar facing out, going north, on the left side, you're riding along. Put the sleeping bag down, bring a sandwich. And watch the coast go by.
A lot of people that I know of, and myself included, when I've had depression, is you go through these idle periods where you don't do anything. You just always seem to have a number of little things in the fire.
I think it's compulsive in some ways.
Is it avoiding something, or is it a compulsion
I don't think it's avoiding. I think part of it is, we keep going back to my dad, but part of it is, for a long time, I was trying to prove that I was okay to him, that I was, worthy of respect or whatever, because I wasn't going to be what he was, a big shot. I actually told him, he was fading out at 79. I would go down there and sit and talk with him, and he'd be in and out of how lucid he was. And I did say at one point, we're sitting out by the pool, I'm trying to drink through his wine cellar, he couldn't drink anymore. So, but I said to him, Pop, it took me till I was like 40 to not be worried about what you thought of me. And it actually seemed to catch him back. He looked at me and he was like, wow. He said, I'm just really glad you aren't dead or in prison like all your buddies. I think that, alcoholism is a very tricky thing. A lot of people who are alcoholics are self-medicating in some way.
Right.
And the trickiest thing about that is alcohol is a depressant. So it's like the worst thing you can do, but it gives you a temporary relief. But the long-term and chronic effect of alcoholism is to make you depressed. Mm-hmm. So that's the catch-22 about it, and the spiral that it keeps people doing. I haven't felt that way. I know I've always been melancholy at times is the word that I used to use. I've had the deep downs when I've had a horrible romantic breakup. Or friends of mine.
What's the worst romantic breakup you ever had? And what was your culpability in it? How's that? Gotta put this next. That's gonna be on the cheat sheet for next time.
I broke up with my first true love girlfriend in college. We were together for a few years. We were madly in love back then. As I was probably, when it happened, I was 19, I think. She was 18, and we were together all this time, and this was again living down on the beach in Santa Barbara. It was pretty idyllic, and then I was culpable, at least at the beginning. I broke up with her. There were just too many other temptations around in the college town.
But you broke up with her before you succumbed to said temptation?
No.
Okay.
So it was all, it was happening anyway, probably. But anyway, and we held on to each other's image as, a very, what we should be together for a long time, some couple years after that. So it was all very dark in that way, in terms of you don't let go.
Like you can't find any satisfaction with the next person you're with.
Well, you don't even have a next person even because you think you're supposed to be with this person, or whatever. Yeah. No, I mean, it can be an addictive thing in itself. But to me, it was mainly, I think for both of us, it was this image of how intense it was when we were young and it was first love. But we have been in touch since then and everything worked out great. We both moved on. Eventually she had part of the deal, and here's another big topic that's, part of the deal was I knew from an early age that I was pretty sure I didn't want to have kids.
Yeah.
And she did. So the fact that we were able to get free of each other and then she had kids is a really good thing.
Yeah.
And I have not. And I realized at an early age, part of it was just me and part of it was my own family. I thought I might not be a good dad, whatever. But also I was steeped early on in ecological literature and thinking, and some of that's pretty apocalyptic. You could see all these things happening. I was always very impressed by the arguments about population, which, were overstated by people like Paul Ehrlich, but I still think they're true. There's too many people.
But still, if you had an inner urge to procreate,
yes,
you would have. It seems to be the inherent selfishness of humans.
I think that's true. It's biological, etc. And so I did not feel that strongly, even though I really enjoy kids. So I wound up, marrying into a big family with lots of kids around. And then my other friends who had kids, a lot of them, for some insane reason, have asked me to be the godfather. And I've performed their weddings in recent years, which has just been astonishingly cool thing to do, to have somebody that I, remember when she was in her mama's belly and now she's 28 and getting married, and they asked me to come and perform the ceremony for them. That's pretty fun. That's pretty great.
That's pretty cool.
And so
that'll give you the warm fuzzies.
Exactly, very warm fuzzy.
I was going to tell you that it always goes back to your dad, is what you said. Like I was a daddy's boy. Some people are mama's boys. Like I was adopted, and my birth mother was an alcoholic, tried to kill herself while she was pregnant. But you don't know that when you're a kid. But I emotionally bonded with my adoptive dad.
Sure.
Initially, I think more than my mom. My mom's a little bit more stoic. And I still, even though my dad's been dead 15 years, like yours, I still am trying to please him in some weird way.
Yeah, that's probably true. You want to talk about being depressed? The current political regime and scene has been the source of a great identity crisis for me, in a sense, because think of the two areas that I've worked my whole life now, my whole career anyway: health policy and environmental policy.
Yeah.
And these are the two areas that they are rolling back like crazy. They're doing everything they can to take us back to prehistoric times in this regard, where it's just all about money and corporate profits and lack of...
It's like they're trying to make it so bad that it has to rebound in the opposite direction.
I don't think they're that smart. I read one of my favorite reading, and I still read widely and all kinds of stuff, but I love ancient Chinese and Japanese poets, because most of those guys were writing in a time of warfare and great turmoil. It could have been written yesterday. It shows that progress is really hard to sustain. I see my good fortune in life as a lot of happy accidents. A lot of it was the tragedy I mentioned of that epidemic landing here. That tragedy was very good for me.
AIDS made you in a weird way.
In a weird way.
Or not even in a weird way, it made you.
Yeah.
Would you say, are you happy?
It's not a way I think, really. I am, but yeah, if I had to say yes or no, am I happy? I say yes, primarily because, is the real key, it's because I'm grateful.
When you're grateful, are you grateful to anything outside yourself? Like, do you believe in God or any sort of afterlife, any of that stuff?
I'm grateful to a lot of people. I don't believe in fate, that you're fated towards stuff. So no, I've been unable to come up with a faith that I think there's God or something. It's funny, I have a sister and brother-in-law down south who are evangelistic Christians. And I finally got up the courage just like last year to ask about, what do they think about this Trump stuff? And he's, they think he might be Satan in turn, which makes sense to me.
I mean, if anyone is like, it's just so, it's like cartoonishly evil guy.
I really, and my dad was this way too, detest fake faith,
Now that we're getting into politics, folks, I think we're winding down. We're probably going to be, Steve is going to play us out. Are you happy?
Happy?